Good afternoon, and welcome back to the second half of the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee's third public meeting. At this time, we will continue with our agenda. Next on the agenda, we have a report out from the evaluation group's preparatory meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kirill.
Thanks, Arthur. And I will share my screen. The members of the committee have received this rubric, but I'll share this just so that we're all looking off the same one anyway. I need to I think I need privileges to share. All right, thanks. All right. Well, you all should be able to see my screen now. But to sort of set the stage, as we recall, last meeting, we were tasked with going back for another evaluation preparatory meeting and basically taking all of the information that we had discussed in the first meeting and then presented on at our last OG FAC meeting last month, to then take all of that information and narrow it down. So if you recall, we had something like 10 or 12 dimensions that we thought were potentially important for us to consider as we're evaluating all of the ideas that come into the committee. And so we took an effort last week to pare those down into really the most critical elements of what we're trying to achieve here as a federal advisory committee. And so we've put together this rubric with 4 dimensions. The first being practicality and specificity, the second being impact and ambition, the third being engagement and commitment, and the fourth being open government, whether it has an open government lens or not, similar to what Alexis and Laura were discussing in their evaluation earlier before the break. And so breaking those down one after the other, we've got essentially wanted to put this rubric together so that as we're all reading the various recommendations that come through or proposals, we're all sort of reading off the same sheet of music, and that we're able to sort of have a standardized but not overly mechanistic, as we mentioned last time, way of assigning scores and trying to determine what are proposals that we want to proceed with, that we want to package up and ultimately include in our guidance to GSA. And so for each of these dimensions, we've got different scoring criteria. For at least the first 2, impact and this practicality, those are scored on a sort of 0 to 3 scale. And we've also provided for each of those scores, 0, 1, 2, 3, what we would consider qualifying the criteria for that. For the engagement and commitment dimension, it's a little bit differently that we're scoring that. Basically, it's 3 questions trying to get at this idea of, is the idea responsive to the public, but also are government actors engaged? And so we've got these 3 questions, and if you can answer yes to each of those, that's an extra point. And then with this 4th dimension, as was mentioned in my previous report out last month, trying to keep in mind that one of the main factors of OGP's independent reporting mechanism, as they're reviewing national action plans and commitments therein, they're trying to review with an eye for whether commitments are being created with this open gov lens. And so we've tried to capture that here as well, and whether or not the ideas that we're reviewing are in scope or out of scope for this broader open government set of work that we're trying to advance. So that's where we've pared it down. Like I said, from 10 or 12 down to 4. But we also have felt that to try and weed out some of the ideas, we thought that we could continue to use this ideation quadrants idea. And in this, what we're trying to look at is those two sort of core questions of what is the impact of this idea if it were to be fully implemented, and then what's the level of effort that goes into it. Or as we called them in the rubric, practicality and specificity versus impact and ambition. And so here's just an example of what that might look like with a couple of ideas plotted against one another based upon where they fall on that scale. And so as with the general idea with these ideation quadrants, the things in this quadrant on the top left are sort of quick wins. They're high impact, low effort, low hanging fruit, we might also call them. The things in the top right quadrant are high impact, but also high effort. Those are serious endeavors for the implementers to take on, but they have the potential to bear tremendous fruit as far as opening the government goes. And then as we look at these bottom quadrants, the left and right, those are all low impact quadrants, and the distinguishing factor there is whether they're low impact but low effort, or low impact and high efforts. And with at least the latter category, it seems like that would be a disqualifying quadrant. But again, a lot of this is so open to further discussion from the Federal Advisory Committee, how closely we want to hew to these things. I'll also note that there were a few important considerations that are not reflected in the scoring here, mainly the idea of whether we want a diversity of ideas across the open government gamut. We think that at least in the advisory or the preparatory committee, we thought that that might be, ensuring that the recommendations that we put forward, it might be a good idea to have them come from all of these different open government sort of umbrella topics. There's also whether we want the proposals to cohere to a specific theme, or rather to synergize. That's not necessarily, I mean, it's related to the diversity idea, but it's also not necessarily reflected here by this rubric. We also didn't have a dimension here for the degree to which agencies are or aren't engaged in this work necessarily. And also it's a broader question of whether we want to continue to consider ideas where we think agencies are not actively engaged. Whether we want to be able to continue to propose ideas that we think are good ideas, even if we think that there's a lack of agency political will to achieve them currently, or otherwise. So it's there's some things that were left out of the rubric, but we think that certainly what we've got here highlights the sort of core ideas of what we think are important dimensions, and try to lay out a sort of a coherent and unified way for us to individually determine where these things fall on the spectrum. So that's a broad overview. I also included some just a couple of tabs of sample ideas of what this scoring would look like in practice. And then again, pulled from these for this ideation quadrant exercise, and that's where you can see, these two ideas might be more palatable than this idea two in the bottom right-hand high effort, low impact quadrant. But that's a 30,000-foot view of what we settled on. I'll open it up to any of the others that participated in the evaluation preparatory meetings, if you'd like to weigh in with any other comments or questions or anything that I've missed. But thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Will you also stop sharing your screen when you have a sec?
Yeah.
If other folks who are in the evaluation preparatory meeting would like to, oh, I guess there are. I'll go through in the order in which people have raised their hands, which is what I've been doing so far. We'll start with Kristen.
Yeah, thanks, Carol, for presenting this and synthesizing a lot of complex discussion so well. One thing with the two axes of impact and effort that occurs to me is missing is how much of a demand signal is there from the public? How much is the American public asking for this? So I wonder if that's like another element, because you could have super high impact and super low effort, so it could be great, but if the public doesn't care, or it's not a priority for them, doesn't matter. So that's just one other dimension that when I think of open government, I think of good government for, of the people, by the people, for the people. And we should all be responsive to the citizens. So that demand signal, somehow incorporating it in, is a differentiator kind of in my mind, but I don't know how to put that up there other than, is it of the people, from the people, and the demand signal, so that we're not just finding high impact, low effort things that government wants to do anyhow, if that makes sense.
That's a great comment. Josh.
So I'm channeling, I think it was Karina or maybe Carol who said in one of our meetings that we as members may not have the information we need to actually answer all of these questions. And I thought that was really critical and kind of a limiting factor on how these dimensions or evaluation criteria actually can be used by us. So I thought that, to me, the most important thing might be to have GSA do the work of answering these questions. And so I want to throw it to the GSA Secretariat folks that are here, if maybe Daniel York wants to answer, like, is GSA, to what extent do the questions that are raised on this rubric overlap with information that GSA is already considering as it's developing the National Action Plan, / how much effort would it be to actually try and answer these questions for us? And the third thing I'm going to say, which I think may be the most basic and important thing that we could maybe push for first, would be to have the National Action Plan justify whatever's included along the dimensions that we set out in this rubric, or some other rubric. Like, I would like to see in the National Action Plan, this idea was selected because it scored 3 on this category because it had the commitment. Here's a link to when the meeting occurred, that the engagement already happened. It identifies staff level, not names, but it identifies staff level roles that can carry it out. So like, it doesn't require a change in law. Let's say that here's justification for why this is high impact, low risk, or whatever it is. Okay, so that was a lot. So if this is a good time for me to ask Dan York for that aspect of it, I will toss the ball that way if that's permitted.
Okay, was there anyone else from the, we can come back to the second, unless,
Okay.
Is there anyone else from the evaluation preparatory? Were you on that group as well? No?
I am, but I was unable to make the last meeting.
Oh, okay. Well, so I'll come back to you then, and we'll go to Dan York to see if he wants to try to answer Josh's question.
I said there's a lot to unpack there. We'd want to certainly make sure we're doing everything within the bounds of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. I would say that as special government employees and regular employees, you're chosen because of your individual experience, right? If we brought you in as experts to help advise the government and provide recommendations based on your experience and expertise. So if we were to do the work ourselves, that would be us doing the work as government, without being open to the public and transparent, which is not what necessarily the advisory committee was set up to do. So I might let Arthur or ask our CMS and get back to us on what work we're allowed to do for the committee. That being said, I agree with your philosophy that all the recommendations that are, or I should say the commitments in the sixth National Action Plan ought to be justified in some way in terms of why this commitment was chosen, why this one wasn't. There's a document whose name I can't think of right now that often accompanies a National Action Plan, a reason response document as to why things were chosen and what wasn't through OGP. So I think all those artifacts are important, and our goal is to try to include those as well. Yes.
Let me go back to Josh, because I think you may want to follow up.
I mean, I guess what I'm not. I suppose it's true. I was thinking that GSA should do the work to do our work for us. But I guess I was imagining it as that we might make a formal recommendation to GSA that GSA justify. If we wanted to have a moment to evaluate, this based on sufficient information, we can make a recommendation. Here's the information that GSA should report out at this point on the timeline, the NAP timeline, so that us or other members of the public would be able to sufficiently understand the ideas that are being put forward as things that we should be evaluating.
So, and I think that recommendation would be well within the committee scope. Do keep in mind that given the committee's feedback of not delaying NAP 6 release, we are being held to a very tight timeline as to what needs produced when in order to get it into the new administration's hands, in order to get it signed, in order to get it published by December.
Yeah.
So yes,
That's fair.
and we may need to work in parallel in a lot of places.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I want to come back to this, but I'm not going to jump in the line. Josh, are you set?
Yeah, I don't know how to lower my hand. I have this problem every meeting. Oh, I see it now. Okay.
Don,
Great.
Kristen, back to you. And then just
Building off of what Josh said, really like that idea of articulating the why and how things are evaluated. And we did that at HHS with our LIMEX public-private partnership, where the public, through and actually an open data roundtable, gave us the feedback of getting started on Lyme disease now through partnerships and go public and make things prizable. And grand prize challenges like the X Prize are a different way of incentivizing innovation, different from a grant, where in these prizes you set benchmarks and then only pay for performance if teams or outside groups actually deliver those results. So it's a really different model, and not a lot of people are used to prizes, especially not in government. So we did a market research analysis before, and we came up with attributes. I'm happy to share this draft with the members. It's not a public document, but we can easily share it with the group for consideration. But it was like, what are the attributes? What makes something prizable? And it's if you know what the problem is, but you don't know how to solve it. It has good public affairs things, so you can say it in like a soundbite. And there are all these metrics that were based on science, and we articulated those and then ranked all these things, and diagnostics rose to the top. So we now have a $10 million LIMEX Diagnostics Prize, but us articulating those attributes and then fitting all the ideas into what's prizable was really helpful. So I just want to plus one to everything Josh was saying. It didn't take a lot of space. I think it was a couple pages. But being explicit about it really helped us long-term with our public engagement of why did we land on diagnostics and prizes for that? Because there was a real rationale behind it. And I think it's very similar here. So if that's helpful, I can share it with the group. And I think that would long-term help us communicate why we pick some of these commitments or not.
I'll chat with Dan York and Arthur in the background, because I don't know to what extent things shared with committee members. I assume that those things become public, and if there is a commitment for that not to be public, then that may create, so I will see if there's a,
or I could pull out the section that is like the market research in that, and not all the whatever secret squirrel world. It was like 5-6 years, it was a long time ago, so a lot of that proprietary stuff is old now.
Okay.
But I can like pull out the relevant stuff. It's pretty short, but
if you could, it'd be very helpful. Thank you. Suzanne.
Hi. So Carol, thanks so much for all the work. I think it's really good, and I think it's a great starting point. And I hear everything Josh and Kristen said, and I think if we can incorporate that in some way, that would be good. My point or my question, I'm still just trying to wrap my mind around what we're doing here as as the Federal Advisory Committee, and because it hasn't been clear to me, but it's getting more and more clear. And I think something Dan said, Dan York, not Daniel, at the end, maybe is helpful, because I was thinking, are we talking about like two parallel tracks? So GSA is developing their national action plan, and then are we thinking we're going to assess the commitments that came in and develop and like come up with like a second proposed national action plan to submit to GSA for consideration? Sort of like, what if when we're doing this, what's the outcome? What's the end result here? And maybe it's two parallel processes? I don't know, maybe that's to you, Daniel?
Sure, I can swing at it, but I think Dan York will want to swing at it first, and then
Okay.
see.
And maybe nobody else is confused. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like it would be helpful to me to wrap my mind around it. Because until now, I haven't really understood.
Yeah, I'm happy to address, but I'll let Dan York
Yeah.
go first.
I would say certainly. So given the time we have, I think we're all gonna have to be working in parallel to some extent, right? So as we look through the public input and start to develop what we think recommendations could be, the Federal Advisory Committee is looking through public input, and based on your expert experience and background and et cetera, are also writing recommendations. We're going to take all of the above and try to develop a national action plan, which then be put out for public comment. The Federal Advisory Committee can comment on that public comment. You as individuals can public on that public comment. It's out for public comment. Then we take the results of the public comment, put them into a final plan, which then we then put through for approval. If the advisory committee needs additional input, experts to come in and brief you on words or ideas or themes or beneficial ownership or whatever, you can certainly call speakers to be able to do that. The GSA is happy to continue to brief you on our progress as well as things become available. But if we're looking to get something into the approval process and then signed off by the White House by end of December, then the parallel tracks will be necessary.
Thank you, Dan. That's
certainly.
helpful.
Yeah, and unsurprising, my view is similar to what Dan's expressing here. I mean, I think of it as like we're both giving input into the process as the process is going along and evaluating how well that process is working. So if we give suggestions to GSA for additional ideas that they should include, so there's 51 ideas that were there and we come up with another 10. If we come up with them in time, then they can potentially consider them and incorporate them. When they come out with their early recommendations, maybe we like the recommendations, maybe we think that we don't like the recommendations, and we can say, you failed to think of X, Y, and Z, and you should do it differently, or you guys did a great job and this is perfect and we wouldn't change a thing. It is, our role is to identify what we as independent experts think would be best included in there, but we are drawing from some of the same pool of information. They had public comments, so we will look at the public comments as well. We will also have our own, John may have a different view than Charlie, who may have a different view than Bobby, and that's fine, right? And like they can not, Bobby's gonna like, no, what we really should do is this. And it wasn't in the public comment, and that's fine. We can include that in our recommendations for what should be included. And separate from the whole NAP track, there is a second role for the advisory committee as well, which is independent of the National Action Plan, which is focused on emerging open government issues. And that is not tied to the NAP. That is us saying, we think government should focus on X or on Y, or something has come up and we want to make a recommendation to the administrator. We can also do that because that is also within our charter. And that is separate from the National Action Planning process. So we don't have to wait for the biannual process to go through. We can be active otherwise. Does that, oh, I see. Yes, right. Sorry, I was looking at a comment just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. So I hope that makes sense. Suzanne, is this helpful? Do you want to talk about it more?
I think this is helpful to me. I don't know if anyone else, if everyone else is on board, then that's fine.
I see. I'm going to recognize Dan York in 1 second. Just want to see if anybody else. All right, Dan, you're up.
Now I've got to figure out how to lower my hand. I'm running into the same challenge. I might just also interject that OGP allows for 1 year after a national action plan is published to make updates. So if there are commitments that need to be reworked or added or subtracted or whatever, we have that 1 year period to be able to do that after NAP 5 is approved and published. Just for just to let the committee know that's the case.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Carol. Back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, just a question for I guess for the group and for GSA. Recognizing GSA is doing their own sort of internal evaluation. If it makes sense as they do that to then present the committee with maybe a weeded out version of those recommendations that they're working through, the proposals that they're working through for us to then also evaluate. Recognizing, I think, if we're working on two parallel tracks and maybe not using entirely the same information, maybe that gets more messy if the purpose is trying to take these ideas, package them up into a suite of recommended proposals, and then hand them off to GSA for the NAP. So I think at least conceptually it would help to understand which sort of broad set of proposals GSA thinks are at the very least workable. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right. But also, like, just the conversation that we were having earlier, where we may put a different weight on Congress, right? There was a conversation that the GSA folks were de-emphasizing things that might require a change in law. We might not de-emphasize it in the same way, right? We may put a greater weight on saying, well, we should recommend to the GSA administrator to recommend to the White House to recommend to Congress that the following law about whatever, like, so like we may evaluate the utility of doing that differently. And also what I hope to do based upon the meeting that we had in December is I'm going to invite outside folks to continue to present to us. We were supposed to have a presentation today, but it'll be next time from the Blueprint for Accountability folks. We're going to talk about their recommendations. There are other folks that I think that we agreed on, and I'll be talking about later on, that will come in and talk to us as well about what their priorities are. So we may end up with a different starting data set than the data set that GSA is using, just because they have to go through a more constrained and formal process. And we can continue, they are able to receive ongoing feedback, but we also are able to receive feedback. So it may just be different data. Sorry if that was a confusing sentence. Other folks who want to either weigh in on this process or on specifically like what the engagement preparatory meeting put together, like the particular weights, do those weights make sense? Stephen.
I just want to kind of follow in on something that Kristen said about demand, which I think is very interesting. And I think it in some way can be integrated into the effort dimension. If there's more demand, there's less effort. Another way to think of it is, are these ideas emergent? And one of those is looking at public opinion in terms of, the general concerns that are behind the proposal. And beyond the public, there's, you can just get an intern to spend an afternoon or a day looking across the internet. Are there articles about it? Are people talking about it in their Substacks? Have there been any op-eds on it? How many newspaper articles have been written? And of course, then there's, how much, is there any activity on the legislative front? In terms of whether we should be focusing on the congressional side of it, there are things that Congress is trying to do that the executive branch can also try to do. It's not really an either or. And so if there is activity on the legislative front to address on the specifics or some related proposal, I think that should be part of our consideration as to how much effort would be involved. If there is already some momentum going in Congress, that's helpful for even if it ends up being some executive branch action. So kind of filling out that in more multiple dimensions, the different indicators of demand, and making that a subset of the effort dimension.
Thank you. Josh?
I'd love to see that this table gets expanded with everybody's input, and maybe we have it sort of as a living document. So we have, those two things are from Kirsten, from Stephen, from public demand and whether there's legislative synergy happening in some way, right? Like we can add that to the list. So I kind of want us to encourage everybody maybe to read the spreadsheet, think of things that you would add as you're evaluating, or right? Like what would you want to see on these criteria, and then channel it to Carol, if I can volunteer, Carol, right? Or like, I don't know how it goes, to Daniel and Arthur, who would then send it to Carol. I don't know, right? But I hope that we can flesh it out. And then I would love to see that this actually become a part of a recommendation that we make in the not too distant future. And it could be as simple as like, we recommend that the secretariat, the Open Government Secretariat at GSA consider these things, and just leave it at that. And it's informal and non-specific, but at least we get, our sort of fingerprint on the process of what we're thinking. An easy low-hanging fruit, deliverable for our group.
Yeah, that's helpful, Josh. One thing that I've had in the back of my head that some members of the public have said is that it's not always clear why a decision is made, right? Why is it this and not that? And like I didn't say this explicitly. I should have. Like one of the reasons for creating, if there's a rubric that we all agree with, one of the things we can do is if there's 20 proposals on the floor, right? Here's the 20 things that we generally think make sense. Well, how do we decide? Because Carol likes one thing and Joyce likes another thing and Ron likes a third thing. And one thing we could do is we could assign our own points for the different things and total up the points and average it. And like, that's how you figure out what the consensus of the group is, right? Like this, having a mechanism where we all put our own weights on it, then you can see sort of, Daniel's just way off. He really likes this thing, but nobody else likes it. Clearly, this is not where the consensus of the group. So like, I'm thinking about this in part as when we get to the harder stuff later on of like, what are the 5 or 10 or 15 things that we say? And people are like, well, how did you come up with that one? You can say, well, we voted with our points, and the points are how we figured out what's the thing that makes sense. Because otherwise, like, to do this in any real world situation, we'd have to meet in person for like a week, right? And that's I would love to do that, but that's not in the cards. So like we need some sort of other mechanism to have a metrics-based approach, I think, to solve these things. So that's what's in my head as we're talking through the rubric. It's just a way to help all of us, because we have such different backgrounds, to try to reach what is a reasonable decision, or at least one that is defensible. Kristen.
Really, really, really like that idea. And, that's how grants are reviewed and things like that, but also how like hackathons are evaluated. So I think that would be a great way to pool our collective backgrounds and differences. And one thing from the civic tech world that I would love to introduce, if we do come up with a, like a formal approach and weighted values, and we're all individually going to do that, and then the aggregate is what gets in. We could also open that up to the public for voting and have a people's choice. And when we've done that for hackathons and civic tech events, I have never once had the judges pick the same winning teams as the people's choice. So I don't know if GSA would allow us to do that, but if we do put this framework in place, we could also think about a people's choice voting with us. And then the top 1 or top 3 get in no matter what us on the FOC do.
So, and with that, we're running a little bit behind because of me, as usual. So we can come. Well, am I right? No, I think I'm wrong. We still are doing okay. I just wanted to be respectful and cognizant of everyone's time. What I would suggest at this point, if there are other thoughts that people have on the rubric, this is a good time to express them. But we can also come back to it if people want to talk about it at the next meeting, once they have a chance to look through the different weights and to see if those weights make sense. I'm just looking for the views of the group. Like if people want to keep going on this, we can keep going on it. If not, we can come back to it next time. So, yeah, Bobby.
I just had one really general comment and thought, which is I view when we're working on it, I view the rubric as just one tool. to help us with the commitments, because after we maybe use the tool to prioritize commitments, there might be other things that we want to think about as far as, do we want to have like certain themes more prioritized or things like that. So we wouldn't want to be so confined to just using the rubric.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one thing I don't want to confuse things today and make it harder, but like, I think that we should have some things that are really hard to do and government's going to struggle with, and I think that we should have some things that are like the important to do, low hanging fruit things that they wouldn't have otherwise. Like, I think that I want both. I don't necessarily just want one or the other. So like there may be value in having sort of different cross cutting stuff. So yes, I don't think this should be the end all and be all, but I do think that it's a really good, it could be a really good guide to deal with that. And there are some things on there that like I might not include as a weight. Like we can get into the details for some of them where like I don't think this is appropriate, or I think that something, but we can deal with that further down the road. So Bobby, your point is very well taken. Suzanne.
I'm sorry to come back to this, but just so I'm understanding, we're going to make recommendations, but we're not deciding on what's in the NAP. GSA is, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we're just deciding what's in our proposals to the GSA.
And we're also saying whether we think their proposal is good or not.
Okay, in a separate, and then we're reacting to their proposal. Okay.
Oh, John, did you want to say something? Oh, John, you're on mute.
I'm just in agreement.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thank you. Ron?
Well, the overriding thing in my mind is we've got NAP 5, and we're going to review whether the commitments have been fulfilled, and that are the unfilled commitments automatically for consideration by this committee, and whether to incorporate those in NAP 6, or we just start from scratch and say, okay, well, that's what happened with 5. Let's move on and come up with, this is probably too much in the weeds, but for example, from my background, I see the PACER recommendation from NAP 5, and of course that hasn't been fulfilled, and okay, so do we press on with that recommendation or others from NAP 5, or do we just say, well, okay, that didn't seem to go anywhere, let's, what is that process? I know we have a subcommittee proposed on reviewing NAP 5, but do we wait for the outcome of that subcommittee's work to decide what if any, from NAP 5 we're gonna? I'm just a little confused on that process part of it.
Okay, so I'll just, others may feel differently. My view is that everything is on the table. If there's something from NAP 5 that we think is good, then it's on the table. Something from NAP 4 that we think is good, it's on the table. Something from NAP 1 that we think is good, it's on the table. Now we may want to do some, the reason the NAP 5 thing didn't go is because of blah, 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 right? Maybe there's a reason, right? Maybe it wasn't formulated the way that could be heard properly. But we also just had our political process go through the rinse cycle, right? We've got a different Congress, we've got a different executive branch, we've got different people, even if it was the same administration. Like, just because something didn't go 2 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that it won't go now. So part of our due diligence is like, is this still important to us? Like, for me, PACER is a huge deal. Like, I think if we could address PACER, like that would be revolutionary from my perspective. But that it's a legislative thing. It's not a congressional, like there's other things that attach to it. But like, I would love to do that. I don't think that there's any reason to give up on that. Just because it wasn't acted on before, and maybe USCS can't do it, but 18F can do it. Like there may be other players that may be more willing to do the thing, and as we look into it, we might be able to find a way to make it. So I don't think any of that is off the table. That's the long and short. I don't know if folks disagree with me. I want to make space if there are. Okay, Ron, did you have more, or was that it?
No, that's that was where you're going is my question. And there are a lot, I just pulled that paper out of just, the first thing that hit me, but there are a number of others that Nat 5, Nat 4, whatever, had not been fulfilled. And I just wonder, is that where we start before we arrive at new directions? I'm just mentally trying to map out a process.
Yeah. Well, if anything, the NAP 4 recommendations, because they were the prior Trump administration, and they would have had some buy-in in theory from the agencies. Like if there are recommendations there that we want to come back around, like I think those may be more likely to be successful based upon how the configuration may change. So there may be a political calculation that the prior Trump administration like this, maybe they'll like it again and didn't go for some reason, but if we come back and hit it again, maybe that will help. So it may actually, in some circumstances, it may be more useful. We'll have to find out as people start to populate the agencies. Wonderful. Joyce?
Okay, just curious question. I get the part of the recommendations building on what was done before. What I find a bit unclear was the addition that you made on if some part of it was bad or not good. We were supposed to speak to that as well. I wanted you to clarify on that. On what basis? Are we saying on best practice research or on feedback from citizens, or how are we going to do that, and why should we do that? Wouldn't that be like pulling down what had been done before, or are we just building on moving forward, just making recommendations?
Well, again, I'll just express my perspective, and others may have a different perspective.
Okay.
So one is we're doing this in our independent judgment. So like it's if we think that something should be in there, then it should be in there. It could be we could be drawing it from a prior recommendation. It could be from a new recommendation. There could be things that GSA recommends this time around, some of which we think is good and some of which we think isn't good. So like there was in a prior plan, I saw some things that didn't relate to open government. And if it were up to me, I wouldn't have included them because I thought they were out of bounds. And if it were to show up again, my personal view would be, not the view of the committee, but my personal view is like there may be some things that are out of bounds as well. And we, in our collective judgment, can say we think this is out of bounds, that you shouldn't include this, we should include that, or that you should include part of this recommendation. So it really is, it's a collective judgment. I mean, ultimately what we're doing here is we're trying to get the US government to make a series of commitments to be more open in a series of ways. And whatever we can do that furthers that goal is what we should do. And we have to decide, is it worth criticizing a thing? Is it worth pulling from something that existed before? Is it worth coming up with something new or formulating? This is ultimately, in some respects, a political exercise of here are the things that we think can move the ball forward. And beyond that, it's just up to you and me, right? Like we have to figure it out. Maybe that wasn't responsive, Joyce, is that helpful or not really?
Yes, I mean, sorry, another call was trying to come in, but yeah, that's helpful. I just wanted to be sure that was the goal of this advisory committee. If we're allowed to do that, to be a critiquing body rather than, so, I mean, it all depends on how we present the facts and the information that we get. But I just wanted to be clear on our direction and the way we're going to go about it. If we agree as a body that it's okay to critique, I mean, by all means we should. But I just wanted to be clear if that was within the terms of our responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically what makes sense in our collective judgment. And so, yeah, Ade, I see that you're next.
Hi, Dan. Daniel. Just following up on Ron's point around recommendations from prior NAP 5 or NAP 4, and I was curious to see, is it realistic? Do we have enough time to do a review? And you may have answered this in some form or fashion before, do you have enough time to review to see why those were not implemented? And if we're not doing that, what's the point of just jumping and recommending the same thing again? If in prior years prior iterations they were not recommended. I was just curious to see, I mean, realistically, do we have enough time to do that? And if we're not doing that, is there any point in recommending the same thing again if it didn't go anywhere before?
Oh, I think it's even worse question than that. I think the worst question is, we're going to come up with a series of recommendations wherever they're drawn from. Well, the agency, does the agency agree? Are we going to have time to have a conversation with folks inside the agency to figure out where the bumps in the road might be? We had the conversation at the last meeting where I thought that we were going to run out of time, right? That the new Trump administration folks are not going to have time to come in to for us to have a conversation with them, right? That was the concern that I still have. That all of these things, in the best, in the perfect universe, we would talk with the relevant agency folks, and they could say, well, we can't do it this way, but we can do it that way, right? So I don't think it relates specifically to the prior NAP recommendations. I think it relates to any recommendation that we make, is that we would want, if we're going to run right into the buzzsaw, then the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee, maybe we should still make it because Congress will pick it up or someone else will pick it up, or maybe we want to do something else. And that will be a decision that we will have to collectively make about to what extent do we want to make recommendations that the administration is unlikely to be supportive this time around. Does that?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
My pleasure. Arthur.
Daniel, just wanted to answer for Joyce to just make it clear that the OG fact is to advise GSA administrator on emerging open government issues. That includes challenges and opportunities, which allows you to be able to provide the feedback that Daniel mentioned. And just for clarity's sake, I want to make sure we're on the same page that the approval of the actual NAP is not done by GSA. What we do, what this team does as a federal advisory committee, is approved by GSA and is put in a NAP, but ultimately it's approved by the White House. And that's it.
That is a very important clarification, Arthur. Thank you very much. Josh?
It seems, as you were reminding us, that the timeline makes it seem like it is impossible, that there is no possible way that there's going to be a good national action plan, good by the end of this year. Good in terms of the things that Kristen is saying, like things should have good public engagement and be supported and valued by a large segment of the population, and also committed, because the whole idea of the national action plan is the White House is committing to do something, right? And also committed by the incoming Trump administration, et cetera, folks. It seems like it's going to be impossible. I wonder if we should consider recommending a more dramatic rethinking of how the National Action Plan works, in light of the fact that it seems like it will be impossible. There are too many competing demands for that to work. Yeah, I'll stop there.
So, I think that gets to specific recommendations, which I'm going to hold off on for now. But yes, I think that I don't think it's impossible. I think that there will be some agency folks that will like some of the things that we're doing, even as they're nascent. But there's a lot of things that we just won't have folks who are counterparties to speak with. And it's also hard to do. We want to run a fully inclusive process that takes into wide account public recommendations, that makes that we run down the details on the things that we do, all of this other, we have a long list of things that we want to do, but we don't have the time to do all of those things. So we're going to have to pick and choose which of those things, is there legislation on this? Were there op-eds on it? We can do that. We can do that work. But do we do that, or do we do there's just going to be constraints, and we're going to have to be realistic with all of our time, because we're unpaid volunteers, most of us, I think all of us really, doing this work, and there's a limitation to how much we can do, and the Federal Advisory Committee structure also massively constrains our ability to work in parallel. And we've been pushing it to be able to do that. So yes, I don't think impossible. I think very hard. I think this is very hard. It's one of the reasons why we've been meeting monthly, is because it's very hard. But I hope worthwhile. 316, we have a couple more minutes. We only have a few more minutes allotted to this. I do think that we may have hit a natural stopping point for this section. As I realize I'm putting all my notes in the wrong place. Is there anything else for the good of the order before we move on to administrative announcements and public comments?
I just threw in the chat my recollections from the NAP4, because I liked your idea, Daniel, of thinking broadly, like back to that, of where the momentum might be. And if I remember correctly, we either before we did commitments or in process, we thought of broad buckets. What are the big buckets that there was strong support for? And then commitments kind of nested under those. So that was quick from memory. I can look back at old stuff, but that might be one approach, is to think strategically, look at some stuff from the prior administration, and then roll it up to a level that we think there would be, broad-based support for it, and then nested commitments within.
Can I ask you, just because the public can't see the chat, would you just sit? Either you can read it.
Yeah, I can read it. Yep. Let's see. Chats. Here we go. Building on Daniel's NAP4 commitment, if I remember correctly, the White House identified 4 broad categories the Trump administration supported, and all the commitments advanced. It may be worth, let's see, hold on. My screen just went away. It may be worth thinking in a few broad strokes and categories with strong bipartisan common sense appeal for good governance. From memory, so take this with a caveat, the broad NAP4, and I cannot see the rest of my comments.
I can read it. The broad NAP4 categories were on the lines of data as a strategic asset and data-driven mission delivery, including emerging tech. 2 is open data, open science, open innovation. 3 is public participation in U.S. agencies' workforce representativeness to citizens. And 4 is agency workforce efficiency and transparency improvements to demystify and reduce waste, fraud, abuse, and redundancies. Sorry, I only jumped in because just make it easier. It's a great
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know why my screen was being so small, but yes. But that was sort of the tactic we took back then, was how can we roll this up to such a level, and then what are the core values and principles we operate from? And we got concurrence around that. And then the commitments kind of sorted themselves out within it, even though I don't think in the NAP4 it was that explicit, but that approach, Daniel, I think worked before.
Wonderful, thank you. So with that, I'm going to move us on to the next section. We're going to go on to administrative updates. So take a moment, stretch. That was a good conversation, everyone. And thank you to Carol and everyone from the team that worked on the rubric. That was really thoughtful work that you put together, and we're all going to look at that and come back to and discuss it at the next meeting. So I've got a couple administrative updates, and I think Arthur may as well, or at least I have some questions that I will throw at Arthur, and hopefully he won't be too angry with me. So one of them is just we at the last meeting we had voted to establish 3 subcommittees. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that it takes to do all of that. And poor Arthur is the one who is stuck with that responsibility. Could you just let us know, and obviously between the last meeting and this meeting, like, we were all on vacation. Could you just let us know where things are and sort of what the next steps are?
Sure. So the updates from the last meeting, as you all are aware, there was a vote to create 3 subcommittees, and I'm pleased to report that the package to establish the 3 subcommittees is currently being drafted. Following this meeting, members will receive a survey to indicate their preferences for which subcommittee they'd like to join. I am aware that you received an email to prompt you to kind of think about it, but we want to be able to collect all that data in one place. So we're going to send a survey out that allows you to click the information of which committee you're interested in, if you're interested in being on a committee, a subcommittee rather. And for the next steps is to provide the packet once the committee members have indications have been added to the packet. We will send it over to GSA committee management officer and the GSA FACA attorney for review and approval for submission. While I have your attention, I'd also like to just share a reminder that the Federal Advisory Committee Act is not a public participation statute. It's more of a it is a transparency statute. The public is in attendance to observe how the government is getting its advice from the appointed members and to provide comments to the committee. The members are appointed based on their expertise to provide that advice. So, and lastly, with that, I'll just say I'm happy you all are members, and thank you for what you're doing.
Great, thank you, Arthur. So I had sent out an email with the data asking folks to respond to me. That was not the right protocol. The right protocol is to fill out the form that Arthur will be sending out to indicate what subcommittee preference you've got. Sorry for any confusion, and thank you. And I think, what was the date that's on? Is it the 24th?
It's the 24th. COB the 24th. So the information that was sent in the email is everything that's in it is still true and will be in the survey. You'll see that same information repeated in the survey that's going out after this call.
Right.
Meeting.
So perfect. Thank you, Arthur. I really appreciate it. I'm working with the GSA folks to put in Federal Register notice for additional meetings. So we're scheduled through the February meeting. As you guys, I'm sure, remember, getting a meeting date is a long and complicated process, as it turns out. So it's much harder to do than you can't just have a meeting tomorrow. It takes about, I think, 30 days to go from start to finish in the process. So I met with the GSA folks yesterday, and we planned out meeting dates through the end of the year so that we can have them reserved. It doesn't mean that we're going to have them all. We can cancel meetings, but it seemed to make sense to have them. There's an additional, thank you, there's an additional fly in the ointment, which is that we're trying to establish subcommittees, but we don't know how long it's going to take because the subcommittees ultimately need to be approved by the GSA administrator. So what we're doing as well is we picked a bunch of additional dates for subcommittee meetings that will also go in the notice. If we don't have subcommittees by then, what we'll try to do is meet as the full committee and then make sure that a quorum is present so that we can have a conversation at that time. If you're looking at these dates, you're probably terrified because these are a lot of dates, right? This is a lot of meetings. I don't think we are going to have all of them, and we're not all going to meet at all of them. It is my hope that after we get through the next month or two, that we will be able to reduce the frequency of the full committee meetings because we will be closer to, because of where the process will be changing. We can go back to a little bit of a longer period of time between full committee meetings and have the subcommittees do the work in between. That said, as the slide indicates, these are potential meeting dates. We're going to put them in the Federal Register. This will give you notice for when you're scheduling stuff. We won't do them all, but this way we will have them available if we need to do them. Joyce.
Are any of those in-person meetings, or they're all virtual? If they're, I mean, I don't have any issues with them, but if they're in-person, could you indicate?
They're all currently virtual. It's GSA funding dependent to make them in person. If we do have an in-person meeting, like these are set almost entirely for Wednesdays. If we do an in-person meeting, we'll talk with everyone, because I imagine Mondays or Fridays are better than Wednesdays for travel purposes. This is just to make sure that we've got the dates if we have to. But yeah, I mean, I want us all to get together in person. but that's a money thing. Ron.
Yes, I didn't see February's full committee meeting on the list. And
Oh, I apologize. This was the future ones.
yeah.
Sorry, I just cut you off. You go ahead, please.
Oh, when is the February full committee meeting?
It is. I'm looking at my calendar now. Does somebody else have it?
The 7th.
The 7th. It's February
Okay.
7th, which is a Friday,
Okay.
from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern time.
All right, that's what I have. I didn't see it on your list, so I want to make sure I had that right. And also that week in advance reminder with the URL was very helpful.
Great. And I should say thank you, Ron. Oh, did you have something else as well?
No.
Okay. And I should say, so the week of the March meeting, we're scheduling, the reason we picked March 21st, which is a Friday, almost all the other dates are Wednesdays. That week is Sunshine Week, which is the traditional celebration of FOIA. I had originally scheduled it for Wednesday, but there's actually going to be a Sunshine Week event here in DC on Wednesday and Thursday, and I didn't want to double book with them. So we ended up with Friday instead. But I think NARA is going to have an event. OGIS is going to have an event. The Reckner Center is organizing an event. And, oh, sorry. Kristen, go ahead, please.
That occurs to me, if we're going to have an in-person meeting and we can convince incoming leadership to support it, that May one would be perfect to do an in-person one in DC, piggybacking on Sunshine Week. So just want to put that plug out there.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. It's March for Sunshine Week. But there's another one in
March,
September.
so.
September is Constitution Day and International Open Government Week or something. So like there may be another thing in the fall.
I think we should aim big and go early, because my experience in transitions, there's a value of getting in people's, front of mind early on these things. So I think, if I'm in a position from inside government to make the ask from HHS, if it's resources, or with GSA friends, like I think we should try as a group to push for March in person and piggyback on Sunshine Week. And then if that doesn't work, maybe we'll land in September, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we'll look to GSA for because it's a funding question, I think, for them. But yes, I would agree sooner. I mean, it's fun seeing you guys on the screens, but like in person might be fun too. So I'm working on next sort of agenda. I'm working on inviting people to come and present to us. We had spoken, so next meeting, we're hoping to have civil society who wrote the blueprint for accountability to come and speak with us. Also on the list of people to invite that I've got is going to be a representative from the FOIA Federal Advisory Committee, because there's a lot of recommendations that have to do with FOIA. I'm going to be reaching out, unless people disagree, to the relevant congressional committee. Oh, sorry, Arthur will be reaching out, but we will ask him to reach out for us to the relevant congressional committees, to House Oversight Majority and Minority, to HISGAC Majority and Minority, to hear what their plans are for the upcoming year. And if we can identify agency folks, I'd like to get them on the rotation as well, so that they can come and speak with us. If folks have recommendations for other people that should come, other folks that should come and speak, I also have one of our own committee members. I would like to have Dr. Cole speak about public participation, because I think he has a lot to share there. And I'm just going to try to sequence it in. If there are other folks that I should be inviting, or if you have concerns with any of the folks that I've identified, or timing ideas, like now is a good time to speak up, or you can email me separately. I'm happy to engage either way. Just let me know. Oh, and I should say, like, I've built a spreadsheet where I'm keeping track of the different folks that are recommended and the folks that we're reaching out to. I think hearing from a wide variety of folks, I think, will be useful for us, as long as we can also maintain the time for us to deliberate. So thoughts, questions, comments on speakers? Yes, Karina.
Hi, sorry everyone, I'm having some connectivity issues, so I turned my camera off to save some bandwidth. But given the theme that we've seen across a lot of the recommendations about how to manage data, reaching out to someone at the Chief Data Officers Council, I think might be a good way to think about how we might tackle some of these data challenges with creating accessible information from a cross-agency perspective. And I'm
Yes.
happy to make some suggestions on who is over there working on some of these particular issues.
I think that's an excellent idea. Yes, send me the names that you might have. Anybody else? Okay. So I think I've gone through the administrative updates. I don't think there's anything else. Arthur, are you aware of any others that we missed? No? Okay. In that case, I'll hand it back. Well, it's time for public oral comments. Do you want me to do it or do you want to do it?
I'll take the public comments.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
So the slide for, so first let's thank the committee for that discussion. At this time, we'll now begin the public oral comments portion of our meeting. We have a total of 4 volunteers who registered to provide oral comments. Each will have 3 minutes to provide their comments. We kindly request that all volunteers provide oral comment. All volunteers providing oral comments remain respectful and adhere to the commenting policy. Let's see, everyone providing oral public comment, please begin by stating your name and, if applicable, the organization you represent. Also, keep an eye on the 3-minute countdown timer. At the end of your time, please conclude promptly to allow the next speaker to begin. The screen now shows the order of those who signed up to provide a 3-minute oral public comment. And with that, we'll start with the first person, which is Jacob Berg. Are you there, Jacob? Jacob Bird, okay. We'll come back to your name at the end. At this time, we'd like to see if Jacob Posner here is online. All right. We'll start with Dr. Dwight Sanders.
I believe Jacob is online. I saw a hand raised.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jacob
Jacob.
Pasner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Jacob Pasner. I'm a professor at Georgetown Massive Data Institute. I also have experience working at the state of California on digital service modernization and data governance. So I have some experience with some of the things you've been discussing today. I'm also on the expert panel with the National Secure Data Service, where I work on governance and privacy preserving technologies. So some of the components that I wanted to comment on here, I think you could benefit from discussion about federal contracting to include interoperability and governance requirements as part of federal contracts. This is kind of getting at the source of where requirements from the government that come from the funding specifically. So as a stipulation of being funded as a federal contractor, making sure that includes adhering to federal standards on data interoperability and usage of shared services. So this could be something, for example, Congress could force adoption of data governance standards for data interoperability layers so that the layer where they interoperate has some standard, not necessarily the source. This allows for that interface between environments. This could also include OMB creating line item funding for standardizing governance in data products during any contract. Another one could be Congress could push on state and local digital services. There was a State and Local Digital Services Act, which provided funding to build teams to help states engage with this standardization process. There are some examples at a couple of states, including California, that have really tried to build these data interoperability layers in secure ways with good governance, including data cataloging, which is a critical component of this. This should require adherence to federal standards, which are being worked on under Title II of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, but don't yet have teeth. This is why the contracting requirements and reforming would be critical. I also think that collaborating with the National Secure Data Service, for example, their secure compute environment and the Chief Data Officers Council to discuss how you could create those privacy preserving but secure environments for doing interoperability. This is critical to develop those standards because if the data can't coexist in an environment, you can't identify some of the interoperability challenges. It also allows for standardization of metadata. So I think going down the list, federal contracting to include standards requirements, investing into state and local government digital services, and working with places like the National Secure Data Service and Chief Data Officer Council to promulgate those standards and get people into the same environment so they can collaborate. And that's all. I'll return it to Arthur. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Let's see. Next, I believe on the list is Dr. Dwight Sanders. Okay. Next on the list would be Dustin Bryce. Go ahead with your comments.
Hello, could everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, super. Hello, thank you for this opportunity to address the committee. My name is Dustin Rice, representing Interest of Justice, an international civil society organization dedicated to advancing democratic governance and human rights worldwide. Today, I speak to you about strengthening America's leadership role in open government partnership and expanding meaningful public participation in governance. As well as we witness the democratic institutions being tested globally, the United States has a unique opportunity to demonstrate how genuine public engagement can strengthen governance and actually rebuild trust. So our organization brings three distinct advantages to this mission. First, we would like to build a global network of civil society partners across the 76 countries that are pretty much already engaged in open government, enabling us to facilitate knowledge transfer and best practices in public participation and global governance. This network can pretty much successfully be implemented in citizen engagement platforms that will increase public participation in policymaking by an average of 40% in partner countries. Second, we will be developing an innovative digital framework for inclusive participation that addresses the traditional barriers to engagement and government accountability. Our platform will particularly affect in reaching underserved communities and in ensuring that diverse voices are heard in the policymaking process. So this aligns perfectly with the United States government's commitment to equity and inclusion in public engagement, digital governance, anti-corruption, and media freedom. Third, we offer proven expertise in measuring and evaluating the impact of public participation initiatives. Our data-driven approach will help governments worldwide demonstrate the tangible benefits of open governance, from improved policy outcomes to increased public trust using public diplomacy standards and multilateral diplomacy. We are proposing a partnership that would establish a public participation innovation lab to basically pilot and also scale new engagement methodologies, create cross-border knowledge exchange program connecting the U.S. agencies with international counterparts, and develop standardized metrics for measuring the quality and impact of public participation. As the United States continues global open government partnership exemplifying in leadership, we stand ready to support the U.S. government secretariat in implementing these initiatives. Our organization can serve as a bridge between government agencies and civil society, ensuring that public participation becomes more meaningful, inclusive, and effective, with an opportunity to drive free speech and human rights protections, which are very extremely important. Our organization is also integrated in other governments as the judiciary in Costa Rica. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Bryce. Next, we will hear from Alexander Howard. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to see you all looking at smiling faces. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. I've been a longtime advocate, journalist, analyst in the space. I just want to emphasize first that a virtual public meeting is still part of real life. If you're going to insist on virtual meetings, don't delegitimize them with the forums or the comments we give here. Second, on process, I want to object to the public chat being closed to public participation. It's a valuable place where we could be interacting with you all, where you could be interacting with each other, and we should be able to see that. I object to the GSA closing registration the day before instead of keeping it open through the end of these meetings. And I object to the artificial constraint of each public commenter only having 3 minutes total with no opportunity for dialogue or follow-up. An open government fact should be more open and participatory. Daniel York said that if there are NAP 6 commitments that need to be reworked or added, you can do that for up to 1 year after the NAP was published. I want to point out this administration did not do so, despite clear feedback from the OGP's IRM and civil society, whose priorities were not represented in the 5th NAP or the 4th NAP. The Secretariat never revised the NAP 5 commitments to be smart, and the challenge commitment the White House added was not from civil society. I'd ask a White House official why they wouldn't add one or revise any, but no one from the White House is here. And I suggest you invite someone from the Domestic Policy Council going forward so this process isn't a surprise and they have an opportunity to be read into what's happening. I suggest the committee recommend on that count the White House Office of Management and Budget issue the congressionally mandated guidance and open data mandated by the Open Government Data Act as soon as possible and create a cross-agency priority goal that is directly relevant to your charter to make recommendations on emerging issues. Well, this lack of guidance is affecting the ability of the American public to get our information and to make the government AI ready. Fifth, I want to say that this recommendations was great. Thank you. But please put a machine readable spreadsheet of these things so people can see it in one place and consider making it into something that's a narrative. It's very difficult for people to go through regulations.gov and access these here. I also want to suggest that you all think about much more ambitious commitments that aren't in these responses. The recs that came in and you described are very granular and specific, and they're evolutionary, not revolutionary. We need to have inspiration and grand challenges that are commensurate with US power and this moment. One thing that was notably missing to me from the past and your discussion was addressing rampant overclassification and secrecy in the military and intelligence communities. Now, I know those agencies are part of this committee, but it's critical that these issues be addressed. And I'd suggest that there's huge public awareness and anger over corruption and ethics issues. Use that. Recommend enacting an enforceable ethics code for the Supreme Court or a ban on stock trading in Congress. Sixth, I'd say the GSA really needs to post a draft explanation of how co-creation has worked in the past and how it's going to work this year. The discussion during this meeting makes it very clear that this is a real problem and the process isn't clear even to the committee members. There is an OGP process and standards for public participation, but the USA has lots of flexibility within that. I'd suggest as an idea that the Secretariat draft stubs of commitments, co-create with the committee members how to improve them a bit more, ask for public feedback to rank those they prioritize, suggest improvements, and then incorporate them. You should be aiming for 8 to 12 strong ones here that are smart. Don't just have a black box. There was no buy-in from agencies in 2018 because very few people were involved in co-creation. And that happened again in this last 5th one. The pool of participation shrunk. Ideation at GitHub didn't lead to commitments that represented civil society priorities. One thing that's missing from the public record right now still is the inputs that were sent to the GSA forms online in 2022, which the Secretariat could disclose to the members of the committee and the public, and the recommendations that were sent to the White House that year, which the Office of Science and Technology Policy has not disclosed. Please request those inputs and review the past action plans from the past 5 years, and you'll see the emergent themes. Please do not repeat the 5th process, which should have resulted in the U.S. being kept under review. The White House will get to decide which commitments are in and which aren't. Do not allow it to be a black box. Make it publicly clear what the committee wants to do before it goes in there so it's clear what gets rejected. And finally, Congress can submit its own national action plan outside of the GSA. And I hope you all consider recommending that they do so that there is a representative body that is engaged in this in an ongoing and public fashion. It's too easy for this process to be consigned to strategic silence and making sure the public does not know about this. And I'd suggest to you that the few number of responses to the RFI and the lack of participation in today's meeting reflects that. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Mr. Howard, thank you. Next, we'll hear from Stephen Buckley. Please go ahead.
Yes, this is Stephen Buckley. I'm the Open Government Liaison for the U.S. chapter of the International Association for Public Participation. And I've been participating in these U.S. open government meetings since before the Open Government Partnership existed. And I know there are others here who formerly worked for the Sunlight Foundation, and they held for the 2.5 years since the beginning of the Obama administration, when he signed on his first day in office the Open Government Memorandum, which kicked all of this off, that for 2.5 years there were meetings. And then the Open Government Partnership came along out of relatively nowhere, because I never heard of them. They never attended any of those 2.5 years meetings. And so that was layered on top of existing Open Government Directive, which still exists. And so I think it needs to be, I think there does need to be a review, as Mr. Kiefover and Mr. Odutola and Mr. Toberer were saying. It's like to have a look at the overall process to see what's working overall, and not just layer another National Action Plan number 6 on top of all the other ones, where there's a plethora, many open government commitments were only half done. And even though they were called substantially done, that's a very generous way of saying half done or undone, unfinished. And so I think there does need to be that review, particularly, for instance, the Open Government Playbook that came out in 2015 only suggested that there be mechanisms for public feedback. It doesn't say how to do it. It doesn't say what the play is. So it didn't actually provide any metrics for or best practices for evaluating public feedback. That's just one powerful example. So anyway, yes, so I would suggest that there be a reexamination of the whole thing. Why is it that the public is unsatisfied, feels they're not involved in democracy after all this time? And we have no proof to show that anything, no hard data to show that they feel any different or better than 15 years ago. So that's my suggestion, and I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. And next, our last speaker for comments, Dr. Dwight Sanders. Go ahead. Okay, please unmute yourself. Okay. There's nothing in the chat. So at this time, those are all of the comments that have signed up, folks who signed up for comments. So thank you all for providing your comments. Let's see, next we'll move to the closing remarks. That now brings us, I guess before we close out, I just want to double check with the chairman to make sure there wasn't anything that you wanted to say in closing before we close.
It's just two things. One, I saw that I thought that Sanders had raised their hand. Did they just weren't able to unmute? Is that what happened, or no audio?
I think a different Dustin had raised his hand.
Oh,
but took it
okay.
down.
Okay, and so closing remarks. One, thank you to everyone. Two, I think that there is, I think there was a lot of value in the public feedback that we just got now. I think that folks have opinions about some of what we received. I don't want to keep you longer today, but I think that we should address some of those things. Do you folks want to spend 5 minutes now going through it, or would you rather we just put it at the front of the agenda for the next meeting? Do people have a preference?
5
Daniel,
minutes now.
when you say go through it, what are we going through?
Oh, so the one note that I saw was about the chat. You guys want to talk about that now? Yeah, okay. Arthur, do you mind?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Fresh in everyone's mind. Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's good to talk about.
Yeah, can we change the view for a second, just so we can see everyone? Thank you, I appreciate it. So not visible. So I think some folks would like to have the chat be available. There isn't a whole lot in there, but it is useful. Josh, I think you were the one who started this off. Do you want to say something?
I'll just say, Alex Howard said something about the chat not being available, and I just +1'd it in our private chat. So we have this chat that the public can't see. So it's a bit problematic. It is very convenient for us to have sort of administrative ability to communicate. Someone said today and last time too, like, I'll be right back, just so we know where we all are. But maybe we should just have a norm of not using it for anything remotely deliberative.
Okay, does anyone else want to weigh in? Kristen?
Yeah, I think a norm of having it be open by default and just sort of having the chat visible to everyone. If GSA can do that, that would be great. And then, maybe there's a technical support that's internal that wouldn't even have to go to all the GSA kind of secretariat folks, but just literally for tech problems, so we don't spam the public if our microphone's not working. Like that happened to me. My microphone wasn't working. I had to leave, come back and all that. And that would be silly to put in the public chat. But I think Alex's suggestion and Josh is amplifying it, and a few others have in the chat, that we should lead by example and default to open, and whatever our thoughts are, we're putting them in the chat. The public should see.
Okay, thank you. Amy?
I agree. We should make chat open if we can.
Suzanne?
I agree. And I also think it could be useful. It might speed up the meetings, because then I'm never having to say something. I can just say, I agree with Kristen, or +1 or something. It could actually facilitate the meetings.
Great. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. Is there anybody, but I'm going to do it anyway, because in the interest of time, is there anyone who has a strong concern with doing this? Okay. So if you will give me the authority, I will have a chat with Arthur and the other GSA folks to see whether and how this might be technically possible to do. If we can do it for the next meeting, then we'll try to do it. If we can't do it for some reason, then we will discuss with you as to why we can't do it. Is that a fair resolution? Okay. All right. So we've got a little work to do. Thank you. All right, so I guess it's closing remarks then, isn't it? So thank you again. I appreciate everyone. I appreciate the thoughtful conversation. I thought that the GSA folks did a great job with their presentation. I am very interested in figuring out the next level that they said they would be sharing, in terms of like summarizing some of the data that they have, so that we can sort of get our arms around it, like we discussed earlier. I thought that the Kirill and the folks who were looking at the rubric did a great job as well. I thought that was really thoughtful and reflected a lot of work, and I think is a sensible approach. I appreciate the comments from the public. We're not in the thing of responding to them on a one-on-one basis, but like it's always good to hear what people have to say. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in a couple of weeks. I'm available on email between now and then, or phone or video or whatever else you need. Take care of yourselves, and thank you all. And let me hand it back to Arthur.
Thanks, Dan. I'd like to say that Happy New Year to everyone. Since I didn't say that during the start of the meeting, and like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the presenters, the attendees, the stakeholders for joining us today, including those who provided public comments. And with that, we will bring this meeting to a close. Thank you all for your time and your participation. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We are now adjourned. Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
so much. Bye-bye.